My name is Marcus. I am 66 years old, and my hands still carry the permanent stain of diesel grease. You can scrub with pumice soap for hours, but that black oil works its way deep into the lifelines of your palms and decides to stay forever. I want to tell you about a Tuesday afternoon last month. I was standing on my front porch in a pair of old work boots. A silver Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway. The tires crunched over the gravel. The driver's side door opened, and my daughter-in-law stepped out. Her name is Chloe. She was wearing a beige cashmere sweater and holding a freshly baked cherry pie. She walked up my steps and flashed a brilliant, perfectly rehearsed smile. I looked at that smile, and I felt absolutely nothing. It had been 9 years, 4 months, and 12 days since she last allowed me to see my granddaughter. She vanished for nearly a decade. Now she was standing on my welcome mat with baked goods and a hungry look in her eyes. Before I tell you exactly what I said to wipe that smile off her face, please do me a favor. Like this video and hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I read every single one. Now, to understand the pure audacity of that cherry pie, you need to understand the quiet, devastating years that came before it. I built my life 1 mile at a time. I started out in the late 80s with one used refrigerated truck, a reefer unit we called it. I hauled produce out of the Central Valley all the way to the East Coast and back again. I drove the truck, and my wife Sarah ran dispatch from our kitchen table. Sarah was the kind of woman who could stretch $1 until it screamed. She kept the dispatch logs in spiral notebooks, tracking every gallon of fuel and every toll booth receipt. We did not have weekends. We did not have vacations. We had the business, and we had our son, David. David grew up surrounded by the smell of hot brakes and stale coffee. He watched us build the company from 1 truck to a fleet of 5, and then 10. He knew what hard work looked like. But then Sarah got sick, breast cancer. It moved fast, and it took no prisoners. We lost her when David was 22. That loss hollowed me out completely. I threw myself into the business, because sitting still in a quiet house felt like suffocating. David and I bonded through that shared grief. We leaned on each other. We ate dinner together every Sunday. We kept Sarah's memory alive in the small, quiet ways that fathers and sons do. Then David met Chloe. She was a real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. She was polished, articulate, and carried herself with an effortless kind of confidence. When David brought her home for the first time, she looked around my house with a careful, calculating eye. We lived in a modest ranch home. The furniture was old, the carpets were worn. Chloe saw the scuffed boots by the door and the faded plaid armchair, and she immediately categorized me. She saw a simple blue-collar mechanic. What she did not know was the actual cash flow of a growing logistics company handling LTL freight contracts across 3 states. They got married 2 years later. I paid for the wedding. $34,000 for a country club reception, custom floral arrangements, and a live band. I wrote the check because David asked me to, and because I wanted my son to be happy. Chloe thanked me with a tight hug that felt like a business transaction. She told her friends the wedding was beautiful, despite the tight budget. I heard her say it, but I kept my mouth shut. I wanted peace. The alienation started so subtly, you almost could not put your finger on it. Sunday dinners were suddenly cancelled because they were doing meal prep for the week. Thanksgiving was moved to Chloe's parents' house because her mother could not travel. I would call David, and he would sound rushed and exhausted. Chloe was always in the background, reminding him of some errand they had to run. She engineered an invisible wall between us, brick by brick, with complete plausible deniability. Then my granddaughter Maya was born. I held that little girl in the hospital, and I looked into her dark eyes, and I saw Sarah looking back at me. I made a private promise to my late wife, right then and there. I promised I would be the best grandfather in the world. I promised Maya would always know how much she was loved. Chloe had other plans. She instituted strict parenting boundaries. She told David that my house was not properly child-proofed. She complained that the smell of diesel grease on my jacket gave the baby a headache. Visiting hours became rigid and heavily supervised. I was allowed to come over for exactly 60 minutes on designated Saturday afternoons. I sat on their pristine white sofa, terrified to drop a crumb, while Chloe watched me like a hawk. The breaking point arrived on Maya's 4th birthday. I spent 3 weeks in my garage, hand-carving a beautiful wooden freight truck for her. I painted it bright red, the same color as my very first rig. I sanded every edge until it was as smooth as glass. I brought it to her birthday party. Maya loved it. She immediately pushed it across the floor, making engine noises. Chloe walked over, scooped up the toy, and placed it on a high shelf. Later that afternoon, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Chloe was talking to another mother by the sink. I stopped in the hallway when I heard my name. Chloe was speaking in a low, exasperated whisper. She said Marcus means well, but he is just too rough. She said he was entirely too blue-collar for the environment she was trying to curate for Maya. She actually used the word curate. She said she did not want Maya picking up my coarse habits. I walked out the front door and drove home. That night, David called me. His voice was trembling. He said he was caught in the middle. He said Chloe was stressed and that maybe I should give them some space for a little while. He used all the therapy words: intentional distance, processing emotions, healthy boundaries. What he really meant was that he was too weak to stand up to his wife, so he was choosing the path of least resistance. He chose her comfort over my presence. I told him I loved him, and I hung up the phone. That space turned into a 9-year void. Parental alienation is a quiet, brutal form of torture. It is sitting alone on holidays, imagining what your grandchild looks like. It is walking past the toy aisle in the store and looking at the floor. It is the slow, agonizing realization that a child you love is being taught to forget you. I sent birthday cards every year. They were never acknowledged. I left voicemails that went unreturned. Eventually, I stopped calling. I refused to beg for scraps of affection from a woman who despised me. I channeled every ounce of my anger and grief into the freight company. I practically lived in the dispatch office. Over the next 9 years, I expanded the fleet to 40 trucks. We bought out 3 smaller competitors. We secured exclusive shipping contracts with major agricultural distributors. The business became a regional powerhouse. I built an empire out of sheer stubbornness. Then, 2 months ago, I decided I was tired. My knees ached. My back hurt. I missed my wife. A national logistics firm called Apex Regional Freight made an offer I could not ignore. They bought my company, the fleet, the contracts, and the real estate for $48 million. The closing took 3 weeks. I signed away my life's work in a sterile conference room with corporate lawyers. I walked out of that building, a very wealthy, very solitary man. The regional business journals picked up the story a week later. They ran a profile on the sale, complete with my photograph and the exact dollar amount of the acquisition. I sat at my kitchen table, drank my coffee, and looked at the newspaper. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. I just had to wait for the phone to ring. It took exactly 4 days. The caller ID flashed David's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. His voice was dripping with forced warmth. He asked how my health was. He talked about the weather. He danced around the subject for 10 minutes before delivering a carefully scripted apology. He said he realized too late that they had let life get in the way of family. He said Maya, who was now 13, had been asking about me. He asked if they could come over on Tuesday afternoon to finally bridge the gap. I told him the door was always open. Which brings us back to the silver Lexus in my driveway, the cashmere sweater, and the cherry pie. Chloe walked into my living room like she owned it. David followed closely behind her, looking everywhere except at my face. Maya walked in last. She was tall, quiet, and carried a thick sketchbook under her arm. She looked at me with cautious curiosity. We sat down in the living room. Chloe immediately took control of the conversation. She talked about how wonderful it was to reconnect. She complimented my house. She poured the coffee. Then, right on schedule, the pivot arrived. Chloe leaned forward, clasped her hands together, and sighed heavily. She explained that the real estate market had been brutal. She said David's architectural firm had cut bonuses. She painted a picture of a family struggling to maintain their standard of living. Then she dropped the anchor. She said she had found the perfect solution to their stress. An incredible equestrian property on the edge of town. $2.5 million. Plenty of room for horses, fresh air, and most importantly, a sprawling guest house for me. She smiled warmly. She said they wanted me to live with them. They wanted to keep the family close. All they needed was a small bridge loan to secure the property. I let her finish. I watched David stare intently at the carpet. I looked at Maya, who was sketching in her book, completely disconnected from her parents' greed. She clearly did not want to be there. She was just a prop in her mother's theatrical performance. I stood up and walked over to my desk. I picked up a thick leather portfolio and brought it back to the coffee table. I sat down and looked Chloe directly in the eyes. I kept my voice perfectly level. I thanked her for the pie. I told her the equestrian property sounded lovely, but I explained that there was a slight problem with her plan. The $48 million was already gone. Chloe froze. Her smile cracked, just a fraction. She asked what I meant. I opened the portfolio. I pulled out the banking documents. I explained that I had set up 3 separate charitable foundations in Sarah's name, one for breast cancer research, one for trade school scholarships, one for agricultural development. I funded them generously. As for the rest of the money, I explained the mechanics of a generation skipping trust. I spoke slowly so she would understand every single word. I told her I had placed the remainder of the fortune into an ironclad, irrevocable trust, specifically for Maya. I named an independent corporate fiduciary, out of state, to manage the assets. The trust pays for Maya's education, her health, and her welfare, but she does not get direct access to the principal until she turns 25. I looked Chloe dead in the eye and delivered the final blow. I told her that Maya's parents cannot touch the money. They cannot borrow against it. They cannot leverage it. They cannot direct the investments. The money belongs to my granddaughter, and it is legally protected from anyone else who might want to buy a horse farm. The silence in the room was absolute. The air grew incredibly heavy. Chloe's mask completely dissolved. The polite, curated real estate agent vanished, replaced by an enraged, humiliated woman. Her face flushed bright red. She stood up abruptly. She called me a vindictive, bitter old man. She grabbed her purse, grabbed Maya by the arm, and stormed out the front door without another word. The screen door slammed shut behind her, echoing through the quiet house. David stayed behind for a moment. He sat on the sofa, looking utterly defeated. He looked at the trust documents on the table. He finally looked up at me. I saw a man who realized exactly what he had traded his father for. He traded a lifetime of loyalty for a woman who only loved his earning potential. I told him I loved him, but he made his bed 9 years ago, and now he had to figure out how to sleep in it. He nodded slowly, stood up, and walked out to the car. I watched the silver SUV back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. I was alone again, but this time the quiet did not feel heavy. It felt clean. Later that evening, my cell phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw a text message from an unknown number. It was a picture of the hand-carved wooden freight truck I had made 9 years ago. It was sitting on a desk next to a sketchbook. A second message popped up immediately after. It was from Maya. She said she had kept the truck hidden in the back of her closet all these years. She asked if I still knew how to fix old engines. She said she always wanted to learn how to restore a classic car. I smiled. I typed back that I knew a thing or two about old engines and that my garage was always open. Greed is a powerful force. It can convince people to lock away their families, to build walls out of silence, and to measure love by square footage and bank balances. But greed makes people blind. Chloe thought she could simply wipe away 9 years of cruelty with a baked good and a fake smile. She thought my money could be easily transferred to cure her financial anxiety. What she failed to understand is that hard work teaches you how to protect what you build. I lost nearly a decade with my granddaughter. I can never get those years back, but I secured her future, and I permanently removed her mother's hands from the steering wheel. We are starting over now, just Maya, a toolbox, and a grandfather who remembers how to turn a wrench. Have you ever dealt with a family member who only came around when they needed a check? How did you handle it? Leave your story in the comments. We can all learn something from each other. If you appreciated this story, share it with someone who might be dealing with their own version of Chloe. I will see you in the next one.